What's the worst, most soul destroying job you've ever had? Telemarketing. So many lonely 80-plus-year-old widows to sell vitamin D2 who try to keep the call going for 10 minutes even though they aren't buying everything, and you try to hang up on them so that you could actually make some money, but your heart says no. I worked on a croissant line. You can bet they never came out of the machine with that nice curved shape. Nope, they are straight, but someone has to bend them into shape. Thousands of them every day, on a moving line. This equates to the most depressing job in the world. TLDR, I bent croissant for a living. Mother ducking fast food. If I'm the smartest man in the room, I need to be in another ducking room. Yep. The other day I overheard a snippet of conversation in which a co-worker remarked, "Yeah, because 6 is a factor of 18, and the manager scoffed, "Dude, I don't know none of that math shit." I once worked in a can recycling factory. It was so depressing. Janitor at a university I failed to get into. It was decent money, $16 per hour, and the work was easy peas. I had to clean for a couple hours every shift, and then there was nothing to do unless something went horribly wrong. So I had plenty of time to watch all the people my age attending school. All those people that didn't end up as janitors. Edit, the university I worked for did provide free tuition for employees. However, I was part-time, and the only way I'd get full-time is if one of the lifers retired. Only full-timers got benefits. The next slot was allegedly going to open up in approximately 5 years, and I wasn't the only one vying for it. And there was a strict non-interaction policy with the student body, after a few counts of sexual harassment from the custodial staff, largely comprised of age 50+ Hispanic men. So I didn't have much of a chance for any cute will hunting moments. I think a girl told me I did a good job cleaning the elevator once, though. 1. Find complex problem on chalkboard in hall. 2. Solve math problem. 3. Duck mini driver. 4. It's not your fault. Financial forecasting. Leaders, tell us your honest opinion where you think the business will go. Me, well, I think this. Mathematically it's the most solid, and it's a pretty conservative estimate. Leaders, no, we don't like that number, go back and do it again. But please give us your honest feedback, we rely on you. Me, okay, well, if I change the assumptions you didn't like and go a little more aggressive, here are the numbers I get. Leaders, no, what are you doing? Make the number say 8. Damn it, we wanted it to say 8 this whole time. If you had a number in mind the entire time, then this really isn't a true forecast. And if you had a number in mind, then stop making me work till 9 PM every night when you had an idea in mind anyways. All forecasting is like this, and it's very frustrating. You know how you hear economists predict X or Y to happen in the next 5 years on the news? I don't really listen to those anymore, because I know that the people who had to do the work probably got pressured to make sure the forecast had a certain outcome anyways. I'm an accountant, and in 2008 I worked for a home builder. I built the forecast and showed that as things continue and with the starts year projecting, we'll lose $3.2 million in this division. They flipped out. Told me to go back again and again. Finally I was given a number that the final forecast needed to end on. I said no effing way. They said do it. I did it. It was all imaginary numbers. When actuals rolled around for the year, lo and behold the division lost $3.2 million. They said, "Duck, why was your forecast so wrong?" I showed my original forecast numbers that were presented to them. They shut up after that. I will always remember those numbers because of how accurate my original, based in reality, forecast was to actuals. Also, I might be the only person on earth who voluntarily, and of my own free will resigned a job in the home building industry in 2009. Tech support call center. They say police officers see the worst side of people every day, so they eventually become jaded, cynical, disillusioned, and so on. They say the same thing happens to wait staff. Well, call center workers take shit all day, eat shit all day, figuratively speaking, and get paid like shit, but don't get to carry a gun or earn tips. Edit, thankfully, I quit that job long ago, and I'm much happier. To anyone working in a call center, get out before it's too late. Also, yes, I'm all too aware of r/tales from tech support, but reading that subreddit is like returning to a crime scene, the murder of my happiness and youthful spirit. Had a holiday job working as a cleaner in a psychiatric institution. So much shit everywhere, and rarely in the toilet. That's some crazy shit right there. I was tutoring a section in a junior orchestra. I was 18 years old, and these kids were about 7 to 8. I'd been playing for longer than these kids were alive, and one just rips through the piece better than I could have if I'd been practicing it for weeks. Left a bit of a sting. That's why you crush their spirit young. Make them hate orchestra and themselves. Anyone who worked in an office in a field you don't care about can tell you that dying of boredom is quite possible. I worked at an office that handed out grants to graduate students for a university. My job entailed, find old paperwork out of the 1 million file folders. White out the person's SS number. File it back. Did that for a year and a half. Never again. The same could be said for factory work. I used to work on a line in a box factory. I can tell you right now that I have never in my life had 8 hours take so long in terms of perception. Day after day after day. Just the same physical task, lift flat press boxes into a machine, wait 45 seconds, lift boxes into a machine, wait 45 seconds, lift, wait, lift, wait. Worked at Walmart enough to experience Black Friday 3 times. I haven't gone out for Black Friday since, and will never do it again. I work at Walmart now, and Black Friday is my favorite day. You can take out all of your anger and frustration on the customers, and nobody gives a shit. No one's leaving the line to complain to a manager, no manager's going to come listen to complaints. You have as many free passes to tell people to go duck themselves as you can manage. I worked at a pawn shop. When a lady came in to pawn her daughter's Wii, I could only give her $30. The daughter would have been 7 or 8, so she didn't really understand why this was happening. The little girl asked why they were getting rid of the console, an innocent question. I looked up to see the mother answer, with tears running down her face, "So we can eat this week's Wheatie." That was pretty brutal. I was a pawnbroker for 2 years. 2 years of telling a customer that what they thought was a 14-karat gold necklace was in fact a gold-plated sterling silver necklace. Their face when you tell them sucks. The worst was when a guy came in and pawned a nice engagement ring. We gave him about $100 to $150 for it. A couple of hours later, a woman walks in bawling her eyes out saying her son just stole her ring and pawned it somewhere. She gave us a description of the ring, and she had to pay to get it out. That job is soul sucking. I'm surprised I lasted as long as I did. Collections agent. For medical and utility bills. In September 2001. On the 11th of September, as our shift starts the towers are going down, and we're all like, aghast in shock and horror. Between calls on the auto dial thing, it normally plays the oldest station. But today, it's a death count and news. The federal government asks everyone to stay off the phones, etc etc etc. What does the owner do? Comes on into the collections floor, stands there, and tells us that anyone that doesn't want to make phone calls is fired, because today's the perfect day since everyone is home watching the television. Seriously. You know how many people we called that were connected to the victims in some way personally? Lots. I worked out my shift mostly worried about my rent, and quit shortly thereafter. I wish I'd walked out that morning. It was the last time I've done anything morally regrettable in that capacity, and a big lesson for me about doing what's right versus doing what you think you need to do. The job was soul sucking as it was, and I ain't gonna work for no soul sucking jerk. But that to this day, is still literally one of the worst days of my life. Every year the day rolls around, I can't help but think about it, why it was wrong, and why I deserved being called every name in the book. Even if it was a question of paying rent that month or becoming homeless. In Sweden, every municipality gives out work to a measured amount of youth. You apply, and if you're lucky, you get a job, and I won the job lottery. Now, don't get me wrong, I was happy to get a job, but I was expecting to work. In the form I had to fill out, I wrote that I had no problem working with children and the elderly, so I was assigned to an elderly home for dementia, where my job description was to get along and socialize with the elderly. And that was also fine, or so I thought. It was a nice, privately owned elderly home, with good staff and good service. The problem was, I wasn't really needed there. I had gotten the job, not because they wanted more people, but because they had to hire a specified amount of youth workers to fill a quota. This was by no means a skeleton crew. Even at night they had 3 staff on shift to take care of 8 people. Whenever something needed to be done, someone else was already on it. In fact, there were more things I wasn't allowed to do as a youth worker, stated on a contract I had to sign, than things I was physically allowed to do to help these people. This was, of course, because there had been a lot of accidents, and the like involving younger, more inexperienced staff that they didn't want to repeat. My job, instead, was to talk to the elderly, get them active, and just generally socialize. So I would sit there, while people did actual work around me, and just talk people who were there because of their dementia. Some fared better than others, while others barely reached the surface at times, mumbling about something that happened a long time ago, then slipping back down again. None of them remembered my name, but day in and day out I would talk to them. For 3 weeks I listened to an old man's life story, while pretending to be his grandson. After a while I would fill in the blanks for him, to try to get farther into the story, or to change the direction of it entirely. He would forget every conversation we'd had the next day. Another woman would be convinced her doctor hadn't prescribed her the pills she was supposed to take, and had hysteric fits. Another would want to call her daughter, would need to call her daughter, even though I explained that her daughter had called her an hour ago, and that her daughter was at work now, and that no, she couldn't call her. What I hated most though was the lack of trust. I didn't even have a key to the elevator or stairs, because I wasn't allowed to take the elderly outside without another member on staff. I wasn't allowed to clean, feed or otherwise help the elderly. I wasn't allowed to help clean or wash anything, because I wasn't to be trusted with chemicals. And so on and so forth. I was not allowed to distract myself in any way whatsoever, because my job was to be social, the thing I'm worst at, and I couldn't even help the elderly in any way I perceived as helping. I couldn't even leave or take a lunch break without asking for the key. And that made me feel as locked in as the rest of them. Working at a for-profit college right before the government started to crack down on them. Seeing students get scammed out of tens of thousands of dollars, and signed up for private loans with ridiculous interest rates, for degrees they could get at a community college for a fraction of the price. My job was to check registration at a private beach to see if people could park and walk down. There's nothing worse than telling a sad-eyed father carrying a cooler, 3 boogie boards, and an umbrella, with his hyperactive children trailing behind, "Sorry, this beach is for the special people, leave now please." We were the only accessible beach for 20 minutes in any direction. I've worked for 6 years as a retail cashier. At this point the cash register has more of a soul than I do. I worked at the VW plant in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It had its perks. Like the cafe that offered really healthy and delicious food for cheap. Or the on-site free gym that had free fitness classes. Or the brand new VWs that you could lease for $200 a month, insurance included. Except, I was there with a staffing agency. Everyone has to do a minimum of 6 months with the staffing agency before you become a VW employee, where you get the car and health insurance and more days off. With the staffing agency you get 3 paid days off in a year. You earn 1 every 3 months. You are not allowed to take an unpaid day off, otherwise you will be written up. After your 3rd write-up, you're fired. I had a bad kidney infection, and was hospitalized because of a 104-degree fever. I had only been there for 4 months, so I only had earned 1 day off. I was hospitalized for 2 days. So I got written up for the 2nd day I had missed, even though I was in the hospital. We did swing shifts that changed every few days. I often had 18 hours to adjust from night shift to day shift. I had been with the staffing agency for a year, and still was not made a VW employee. They quit pulling people onto VW because they were ahead of production schedule by 20,000 cars. Then they laid off 700 employees from the staffing agency, myself included. The only people they kept were the top 30 people that had been with the staffing agency the longest. The day they announced the layoffs, we found out that we would still have to work for another 3 weeks if we wanted to get our severance check. And that we also had to work an hour extra that night, even though we were being laid off because of overproduction. Tech support at a Comcast call center. Not only was Comcast the worst company to work for, but the hours were a killer, the training was woefully inadequate, the pay was meager, opportunities for advancement were non-existent, and to top it all off, I had to go into work and basically get yelled at by customers for 8 hours straight, every day. I used to get up at 3:30 am, my shift started at 4:30, and just sit at the edge of my bed for 15 minutes, mentally preparing myself for the shitty day I was about to have. I could go on for a while about how bad this job was, and how duck this company was to work for, but I don't have enough time right now. I'm sure you've all heard it before anyway. Wait, there are jobs that aren't soul destroying? When they aren't soul destroying, they're called hobbies, and nobody pays you to do it. Got a job in a company that required top secret clearance. Got the clearance, and then sat in a shitty office for 8 hours a day putting old, moldy documents into a shredder. The fat lady who sat next to me would constantly talk to herself saying stuff like, what was I going to do next? Oh, that's right, I need to grab another little docky and put it in Mr. Shreddy. And occasionally I'd catch the fragrance of her overpowering tea rose perfume, combined with a subtle blend of haven't had a shower in 2 weeks and just sharted in her padded cotton trunk panties. The odor was so foul that my eyes would occasionally tear up. Meanwhile, the documents that we were supposed to be shredding had clearly been submerged in water for several decades, and then allowed to dry out and grow tendrils of black mold. I'd shove the illegible documents into the giant metal document shredder, and instead of shredding the documents, would just bunch up against the blades, and I'd use a pen or my fingers to pull the mess out and drop it into the waste basket. I asked my supervisor why we didn't just incinerate the documents, and he'd spout some nonsense about in SA/CS02-01 blah blah blah, and then he'd say with a smirk that I should be glad that I had a ducking job. Oh, Mr. Shreddy, you bad boy. The fat lady yelled one day, and I saw that she had dropped her sack lunch into the shredder input. I don't know what was in her lunch, but I'm pretty sure it was 90% peanut butter and 10% butter. For some reason the smell of the peanut butter, her perfume, the mold, and my general discontent caused me to toss my cookies into the machine. Well, now you owe me a lunch, was all she said.